It is my great pleasure to introduce Vanessa Sochat. She is a computer science, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory computer scientist. And she has been a software engineer for 15 years. She received her PhD from Stanford University and has done extensive work on container technologies, developer tools, podcast, developer tools and fostering open source communities. She founded and hosts the Developer Stories podcast. In her current role is focused on converged computing, developing infrastructure and community to bridge the space between traditional HPC and cloud native. In her free time, Vanessa likes working on fun projects, sleeping, learning new programming languages, running fast, and eating avocados. I like the sleeping part. That is really important. Vanessa, I actually found out about her when we joined recently a project around Todd Gamlin, who's the inventor of SPAC and is basically leading at Lawrence Livermore this amazing build project, which is, I think, it's going to revolutionize how software is being built and linked. And I suddenly found out all there are various little pieces that Vanessa did, and I was really amazed. And actually, one of my students is currently not here, Farid Zakaria, who is actually working on, really trying to sort of totally change the way software is built, and starting essentially at replacing the ELF format, the binary ELF format, with a MySQL table format, just to sort of be able to actually specify builds with SQL queries. What a concept. And so that will make builds much more reasonable and will, I think, have far-fetching impact on how we actually get introduced into computer science. For the computer scientists among us, we all know how incredibly frustrating it is to build software. It's actually the reason why most of our projects fail, why we get really intimidated to try out new things, and why so many things are just completely fail. So, but that's not what Vanessa is going to talk about.
Said that too.
So Vanessa is going to talk about introspection and open source. And this is really important because we want to actually create new careers as part of open source within the university. And her experience is incredibly valuable. So Vanessa, sorry for my escapades, but here's please go ahead.
All right, so Vanessa's is recorded. And so I'm playing, she is online right now. So for those of you who are, have your laptops on the Zoom, you can actually ask her questions while the recording is going and she can answer. It's the same for, of course, for the remote folks. So I'm going to just get this started and hopefully I will have it to work.
Yeah, while we're waiting, if anyone does want to talk about binary analysis or Kubernetes, Flux framework, I work on a ton of stuff and I love absolutely all of it. This talk is very much not that, but I'm very happy to dig into technical things too later.
Scientists, and today we are going to talk about open source introspection. So what the heck is that anyway? Well, at a high level, introspection is like this tool belt that you have to look at your own mental and emotional processes. So in the context of open source, we can say that's looking at your role and priorities when you're engaging with open source communities. Oh, hey, what's up, Rudy Rembrandt, dude? That sounds hard. Indeed, it's really hard. It can take a lot of practice to really look into yourself and ask these questions. For example, it could be on the scale of very simple to complex. So a very simple question could be like, I just had this interaction and it made me feel very anxious. Why was that? To something more, high level, like, oh my gosh, what is my purpose? Why am I here? As we see this cat is having this very introspective moment. So open source introspection in a very concrete sense is asking questions about your role and priorities for engaging with open source communities. Rudy Rembrandt did again. That sounds, this guy, right? That sounds boring. Okay, so I was going to go through this talk and present a series of questions, but since you're making me level it up one bit, I will make a proposal. We will not just ask questions, we will also add stories. Specifically, I will share some stories from my personal experiences. And I am going to have my fellow, the wise Yoda dog here, that is going to help us alert us to when there is a story upcoming ahead. What do you think of that? Ha, he's speechless. Alrighty, let's get started then. Yes, I know. Trust me, I know. So the first question is easy. Why am I contributing to open source? I hope the answer for you is because, Vanessa, I am having fun. But there are many valid reasons. You might be a maintainer that is very passionate about some of your projects with a vision for the future. And you also care a lot about the community and the ecosystem. Now, if you don't want to be herding as many cats, or octocats in this case, you may be interested in being a project member, which is sort of one level down from maintainer with slightly less responsibility. You may be a worker bee, so your employer or perhaps your advisor is like, you must work on this project. Totally legit reason to participate. You may also be a job seeker. So if anyone's ever gone on Reddit and seen someone being like, hey, can you check out my portfolio? How does it look for this job prospect? This is also another good reason. You might be a student. I don't mean just in like the academic sense. I mean like you're a person that likes learning things and you are out there to sample the flavor of open source projects and languages and everything that it has to offer. The social bee. So funny story, I joined GitHub in 2011, but I didn't really realize until 2015 that it was actually a social network. I could make friends on here and have quite a lot of fun. And finally, there's the code lover. This is totally me. We love programming, we love coding, beep boop, all the open source. Ah! So there are many good reasons to contribute to open source, everything from vision to the future to one I didn't mention, getting your code out there for visibility. So there's a famous piece of writing called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And there's this idea that many eyes on the code squash the bugs. So we want to squash the bugs. And there's one underlying thing here that I want to mention that I haven't yet. And that is that we are looking for a sense of belonging. So what am I talking about? Actually, there was a paper, an article that came out about a month ago by Dr. Kat Hicks that articulated this perfectly. So she said, okay, the sense of belonging is this general inference that we make based on everything around us about how well we fit in some kind of setting. And we do this usually to figure out if we belong in a certain role. So she was talking about agile software teams, but this could also be about open source communities. And specifically, we're looking at who else is in the role, what the heck are they doing, why are they doing it, and how it's being done. And we figure out if that agrees with our sense of self, with our own personal values. Speaking of these values, this is the second question that I think is really important to ask when you're doing open source introspection. What do I value? So one thing I've noticed is that when we're interacting with the community, we can tend to compare mindset. So for example, you may have an academic mindset. I am valued based on my papers. We have top-down leadership, student up to professor. We have lots of rules and policy because this organization is huge. When I go to a conference, I must be professional and scholarly and a little bit serious. And also science is the total underlying goal. Now, you might come from an open source community. Maybe there's not a lot of academics where the value is based on the software, on the work that you do. There's a flat hierarchy. Nobody cares what your title is. Just put in the PR, man. Let's talk about it. It's likely project oriented. There might be an overall governance, but ultimately the unit of importance is that project. And the emphasis on like the goals of the project and having fun. And although science might be a use case, it's not like the only goal of the software. And so one thing I really want to press here is that my advice to you is to just, whatever you may think are the important attributes, write them down for yourself. Look at the communities that you care about, write them down, and just see how well there's a match in those values. And when you're doing this, you might start to ask, like, where did my values come from? Where did the values of this culture come from? And I mention this because I noticed something really interesting about a lot of these communities. And that is communities tend to take on the values of their founding members, sort of like graph inheritance in a way. So imagine that you have community A with an academic mindset, and they're like, aha, we need to make a community B. It's just really important. It's missing. So they start to make it. So do you think that community B is going to be drastically different? Or maybe community B is going to look a lot like A, which makes a lot of sense because community B inherits the values of the founding members from community A. And this isn't bad. It's not to say they did it wrong. It's just that like you can't know what you don't know. And on the one hand, the longer that a community has been around, it's probably harder to change their values. But if you're able to engage with that community early on and be like, hey, I have an idea, maybe we could try this different idea. I think, at least what I've seen, is they'll be more likely to think about it and be like, yeah, let's try that out. So we've talked about why you're contributing to open source, looking at some values. You're ready. Let's find the communities. Where are they again? Yeah, we haven't talked about that. So the next question is, where do I find community? And I want to say you find community in the bakery. No, I'm just kidding. So communities are a lot like cookies in the sense that there's different types and flavors. And in the same way that you can look at an oatmeal cookie and have some expectations about it, what it's going to taste like, what it's going to be, we can do the same thing actually for different kinds of communities. So I present to you the cookbook of community phenotypes, just a couple, of course. So let's start very simply with the abstract cookie. We create communities when we have a need. We make cookies because they're delicious and when we're hungry and we want to eat them. So more specifically, we create open source communities when we have a need. And specifically, this kind of open source cookie is based on a pressing real world need that manifests in a software solution. So I was going to stand up here today and like tell you the whole story of like Linux and, you know, it's a really great story. But then I was like, you know, Vanessa, they can also read Wikipedia. You don't need to do it for them. So I am not also qualified to tell this story. So I want to tell you a story that I am qualified to tell. Yes, hello, wise Yoda dog. I was expecting you. Let's go into a story, shall we? So this story is about the Singularity software. It starts back in 2014, which was the head of the reproducibility crisis, which sort of, to be fair, started in the 2010s, but really came to a head here. This is when you saw articles like this, estimating the reproducibility of psychological science. Over half of studies fail. And if you were in the field at the time, you were like, oh my God, this is an affront to my entire work, my entire field. This is really bad. Now, at the same time, you were probably experiencing the magic of container technologies. For me, for Docker, this was 2015 and had first been demoed in 2013. And so very logically, you're like, problem in science, container technology, let's push those things together. Containers for reproducible science, like duh. I mean, at the time, it was just so obvious. It was like a piano falling out of the sky and hitting me in the head, except maybe it was a whale or something like that. So if you went to your HPC admin and you're like, please install Docker for me on the cluster, of course, they said no. So it felt kind of like this. But regrettably so, because this would have been a huge security thing to install a root-based daemon. But this is where Singularity came in. So with Singularity, I want to point out some pattern in this story. And this is why I think this is a really good example of a pressing role need that manifests in a software solution. We start with this environment. The environment can be what's going on in academia, it could be technology, it could be a political ecosystem. It is an environment that combines with personal need. So I found I loved using containers. I wanted to use them for science, and I wanted to use them on my cluster to run my science, but I couldn't. And gosh darn it, I wanted to be able to. And so this is like the perfect storm. And under this perfect storm, this is what allowed the Singularity community to be established and flourish, if you remember that. And I believe it's these kind of ingredients and a little bit of luck and chance, like of them coming together, that lead to a really inspired and excited community of this particular type. So with a talk that I gave in 2017 at Perk in Mind, where I said, just give them the sandwich, I present you ingredients for open source software communities. The first is that real world problem. You can have the greatest software in the world, but if you don't have people that have an actual problem that need it, you really don't have much at all. You need a path, a direction, a hope that other people can look at and be like, yes, I'm excited about that too. Let's go there together. And you need to be able to talk about it. So very practically, communication channels are important. And for fun, also, so when you go to a conference, you're recognizable. It's good to have branding. It's good to have symbols that help to unify the community. But there's one more thing, and this might be the hardest, and that is you have to be loud. And for the introverts in the audience, I get it. Putting yourself at the table, posting on social media when you'd rather be quiet and you feel obnoxious is an incredibly hard mental barrier to go through. But if you don't do that, again, you can do the greatest work in the world, but if you don't tell anyone about it, no one's going to know about it. Alrighty, so the next kind of community cookie that we find is one based on a need for identity and structure for a category of people. So I can look at these cookies. These are Valentine's cookies, right? They look delicious. And this need can start from a place from feeling different. So you're in a scenario, it's like one of these things is not like the other. And then it's like, oh my God, it's me. I'm the other and I'm different and this is a problem. Personal story time. So for me, I was in graduate school and I graduated in 2016, but I wrote this post in early 2016 and it came from a place of feeling different. I said, you know, I love building things and I just went through grad school and I encountered all these problems with reproducibility and I think there's a missing layer. I'm calling it an academic software developer. We need people at universities that are just working on software like container technologies. And so I didn't see a path for me, but I knew that at least I had the direction of working on that specific thing. So I graduated, I worked on Singularity, I gave lots of talks about it, I was sitting in research computing, but the entire time I was like, what am I? I'm not a sysadmin, I'm sitting in research computing in HPC, I'm certainly not an academic, I don't think people would consider me a software engineer, like, where is my community? And so around this time, this is also when the research software engineer movement was coming to the US. I saw this and I was like, oh, are these the academic software developers I was looking for? And actually, so there's a whole talk that I gave on this, but the movement started actually as early as 2012. There's a link to the talk in the bottom if you're interested. It's a very interesting story. It started in the UK and now it's sort of a worldwide movement. And this is the perfect example of one of these sort of role-based communities. And I knew immediately that I wanted to prove that I valued them. So I knew that contribution was a means to assert my value to the community. So I dove in with just 2 feet. I'm a human, I only have 2 feet, not 4 feet. 2 feet, 2 arms. I did everything that you can imagine, you know, down to a podcast hosting we called it Jeopardy game, and it was a lot of fun. And so this perfect example of a community based around role, I want to point out that we often look for these communities based on locale. So we look at our institution, our employer, the people sitting around us. But I also want to say that I think after more life experience, everything I just said, I think you should be skeptical of. So let me tell you why. The reason is because I think what we really need are people that believe in us and support us. Because when you think about it, searching for a role, that title thing is really searching for your own identity. And although it would be totally fantastic to go into like a coffee shop and be like, this is the sign you've been looking for, congratulations, you found it. Real life doesn't work like that. Real life has paths and you have to decide where to go, left or right, and then you come to a place without a path and are going to go into the gnarly woods and get bitten by God knows what. And often at times you're going to make good life decisions and find yourself in a beautiful place kind of breezing and flying. Other times you're going to make really bad life decisions and find yourself walking over a fence in a nasty thing of water, getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, and the only thing to do is to jump into the nasty water. And yeah, that really happened. Anyway, with support from a people or even just one person that believes in you, that gives you this safety, the psychological safety to take risks, to learn not just skills, but about yourself and to find that identity. And it's wise Yoda dog, it's time for another story. So in my life, there have definitely been people that have played that role. My first one was after college. This is Ahmad Hariri in Hariri Lab. He was the first person, he was like, V, we have these HPC clusters. Here's the software I want to use. Go figure it out. He was the first person that believed in me and gave me that freedom to go off and learn and do things. And before that point, I didn't have skills. I was a psychology and World of Warcraft major. I didn't have any confidence. And this was the start of me getting some skill, falling in love with programming, and starting to develop confidence that I was a person of value that could do things that other people value too. The next group of people that gave me that same acceptance, psychological safety, actually wasn't until 7 years later. And that's an important point because there's big periods of our lives where we don't have that protective structure. And during those times, you just have to be strong. You have to take care of yourself. So when I joined the Poldrack lab, specifically Russ and Chris on the bottom right, they were the first people really in graduate school to really make me feel like my work was important and support me for the work that I wanted to do. And then finally, after that, my first job after graduate school. So this is Ruth Marenshaw. She's the CTO of Research Computing. What you can't really see easily in that picture is that's actually a Darth Vader piñata. This was a birthday party. It was all of Research Computing, and we were killing that piñata, and it was super fun. So Ruth gave me this safety where it was the first time that I felt like it might be okay to be myself, to be my authentic self, let my personality out, which is a little bit silly, making bad jokes, a little bit more open than I had ever been. And so to kind of finish this transition, where I am now, this is the Flux and Converged computing teams. This is actually a group of people that are across many different kind of groups at the lab. And I absolutely adore these people. I adore the work that we're doing. And I have the ultimate feeling of psychological safety, feeling like I can be my authentic self. And that allows me to be brave, to take risks on ideas and technologies that, have a high chance of not working out. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay, because I know this group of people is here to support me. And so I want to point out that creativity in our work comes from this psychological safety. Immersion in your interests and being able to focus and not worry about bad things in your environment also comes from psychological safety. And really, I think what we might call life balance, which means different things for different people, also comes from it. And more specifically here, I think it's really important that we take care of our bodies and our minds first, which is something that our Western society is not super great at. As we know, in Western society, there's like this epidemic of busyness, like it's so fashionable or something to be busy. Like if you go into a coffee shop, you expect to see like the line that's moving and people are going in and they're going out. And then you see some people sitting and they have their laptops and their little internet, their phones, and they're getting work done. And then you see that one guy who's like, he has his coffee and he's just gently sipping. And you look at him and you're like, what are you doing, you psycho? Like, it is so terrible that we are so accustomed and normalized to this idea of busyness. I really wish it wasn't like that. And so I'm going to tell you to try to take some time for yourself. So to summarize, where do you find a role-based community? I want you to actually question this. When role-based community is what you think you need, pause for a second and question that. Personal growth and discovery is a powerful seed, and stability and support might be where it's at. So for our next kind of community cookie, this is the turducken cookie. Is it an oatmeal cookie? Is it a chocolate cookie with walnut and drizzle and something in the middle? Nobody knows. So this kind of community is based on a need for connection that's not tied explicitly to a role or project vision. People from all over the place. And so for this story, let's go back in time to last year when this guy took over this social network, mind controlled it, the network previously known as Twitter, and nobody knows what's going on anymore. But particularly a community member named Alan Sill looked at this and he was like, oh my gosh, all of the HPC communities leaving Twitter. This is the place where we used to talk about things. How can we create an effective human-centric HPC community? What can we do? So he brought a bunch of us together and we talked about it, and we ultimately created HPC Social, HPC practitioners and friends, just based on this need for connection. And it's really flourished since then. So you can see the resources here. All of these have been very democratically put together in the sense like we work together. The hierarchy is flat. Resources from, jobs to blogs and places to chat, Mastodon, Twitter, Slack, Discord, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing I've noticed that's interesting is that these communities that often are based around online networks, they often develop into real world interactions. So like you make friends and then, oh my gosh, you see them at supercomputing, which is a big conference in high performance computing. And nothing speaks more strongly for the success of a community like this than having a really awesome HPC Dino sticker, not just that, a reflective one that lots of people are excited about. So this is our Slack also, which is really fun, very safe place. And you can see there's almost 300 people in it, and the community is under a year old. So that is really awesome. I absolutely love interacting with these people, and I made a lot of new friends, and I'm learning things too. So where to find this kind of community? Well, gravitate toward your interests. Gravitate to where people are having fun, and you are definitely going to find them. Alrighty, so you've joined the community. Now you kind of want to figure out, like, how am I valued? Am I valued? And I bring this up because oftentimes it's the case that a community says one thing and they do another thing, and you're like, these two things do not make sense together. So let me give you an example of when actions speak louder than words, or actions speak when words mislead. They may say, and this is actually a very common one, like, yes, we value diversity, we have the DEI group, and we have DEI day, and this picture's on our website, but when you look at leadership, it is majorly one demographic. They might also say we believe in equality, but then when you go into a code review, you realize that your code review was 120, comments long, is consistently that, and everyone else's seems to be like, LG to me, looks good to me, like no problem. And then finally, they may say, like, we value open discussion and opinions, but if you post something that someone disagrees with, they are going to report you for having them. And especially that last point, I want to bring up that for all of these things, the reporting thing is like an anonymous way of avoiding a discussion with someone. So for all of these points I brought up, they're all opportunities for discussion. Anytime there is disagreement, it's an opportunity for discussion. So here are the example. Okay, this code review was off. Should we have some kind of standard protocol? Can we think more about the election process? Oh, you think differently than me. Well, why do you feel that way? And so disagreement or conflict is opportunity for discussion. And in fact, the most mature communities expect it and grow from it. And there's a point that's really important that I want to bring up, is that in the case where you disagree with someone, always choose communication over accusation. It's so easy to go to a code of conduct and report someone anonymously and try to get rid of them, as opposed to saying, I disagree with you about that statement. Can we talk about it, and can we learn from each other? But in the same respect, it is one thing to say, like, yes, you have a negative experience and you can inspire change, but like, I can't belittle the idea that when we have these negative experiences, they feel really bad, right? Like, they give us that imposter syndrome. We have a bad experience. We look around, we're like, oh my gosh, I don't belong here. I'm going to go find a pond somewhere and go upside down and stick my butt in the air. I mean, that's not what I do, but if that's what you do, that's totally cool. And so I want to make the point that when you engage with communities, when you're trying on an identity, it is okay to do that and change your mind. And one of the most important things we learn throughout our career is to be able to say yes to something, to say no to something, but also to say not anymore. And this not anymore part is one of the hardest things, because often it means that we had previously said yes, and then we decide to step away. But a lot of times in this decision to step away, it's realizing that we're not being valued in the way that we want to be valuable. And so it's a choice to be like, you know what? I am brave enough to recognize that I have worth and my time has value. And I don't think my values are lining up here, or I'm not being treated the way that I want. And I know that I've put a big investment in this community, but I'm going to step away because I'm a valuable person and I want to be somewhere where they see that. So in this process, self-compassion is key. And I want to share with you a quote from Bruce Wilson at Oak Ridge National Lab. I think this was about agile teams, but I just really like the idea for self-compassion, because it's not just how you think about other people in sort of a retrospective report. It's also how you think about yourself in the past. So the idea is that we truly understand that people did the best job they knew how to do at the time they did it with the skills and the information that they had. Because it's so easy to look back on what you decided, or heck, even your code, and be like, oh my God, this is absolutely terrible. Like, who wrote this? It wasn't me. Oh my God, it wasn't me. But we have to have self-compassion and face ourselves with that. All right, so last point, how do I create culture? So creating culture is also changing culture, because in changing culture, you're also kind of creating new ideas. So this often comes from sort of like in Madeline, when the nun wakes up in the night, something is not right, something is not right. And actually there are many derivations of that. So it could be something as small as like, okay, I just came out of this interaction and it was really stressful. It could be something like, you know, we could do this better, something's missing, this environment is toxic. It's all, not always, but it's often the case that a community value is different from our own and we feel cognitive dissonance from that. And so the first common reaction is like, oh, get me out of here, I don't want to feel this, but actually, I want to suggest that you use the nudge approach. So the nudge approach starts out with just first asking, what do you want to change and why? Because sometimes we have like emotional reactions to things. We're like, oh, that sucks, and then everything's terrible. And like from Office Space, you're like, I'm going to burn it all down. But really, then we come back to the level ahead and we're like, actually, it's probably fine. So once you're convinced of that, though, then what I like to do is to formulate my ideas into basic questions. So for example, let's say I'm in a working group meeting and there's someone there that's like very controlling and dictating, and you know, lots of other people aren't speaking. I might step back and be like, this is kind of about leadership. Like, what do I think is leadership and how does that compare to what's happening here? Well, maybe there's this model where we make decisions together and that's sort of bottom up. And there's this other model that's top down where like someone is telling everyone to do. Which one's a better fit for my community or my working group? And if it's not perfectly black and white, maybe there's some middle ground. And so you take these questions and you formulate an ideal before and after. Like, okay, before it's like this one person is controlling everything. And after, lots of people are speaking their mind. And so what do you do next? Do you ask for permission? You go to the meeting, you're like, okay, like you were kind of mean last time and like, pretty please, can we just do it this way? Absolutely not. That usually doesn't work for many reasons that I don't have to get into. But more importantly, I'll also ask the sub-question. We often, I've noticed, seek the validation of others first for ideas. So for example, if you have a really cool idea for software or whatever, you often want others to validate the idea first. But here's the thing, if you went to someone else and you believe so strongly in something and they said, that's a terrible idea, like I think it's terrible, you know, would you really change your thinking about it? And so what I want to suggest is like a proof in the pudding approach is more convincing. So to go back to our nudge approach, what I like to do is to take the ideal before and after, match that to a simple action like, okay, I'm going to come up with guidelines for this working group meeting. Maybe there'll be a structure to the meeting with a way that people interact. I'm going to do all the hard work and I'm going to bring it to this meeting. And I'll say, you know, I came up with this plan, I did all the work, really, you know, low risk for you. Can we just try it once? Can we just, it's just so easy. When you present it like that, it's very easy to say yes. And then maybe they'll try it and they'll like it. And that's sort of the nudge approach, like, oh, just try it once a little bit. Okay, so we finished asking these questions. And I first want to say, these are not the only questions. They're not the right questions. They are questions that I came up with because I think they have a kind of logical flow. Let me explain. This first question is about figuring out if it's really the path that you want to pursue. Some people do things because they think that's what they should be doing because someone else told them to do it. But you should really figure out if that's what you want to do. Once you do that, well, there's so many different communities out there, you need some filter criteria. And I think I want to suggest that they're based on your values. Once you've done some filtering, well, then you need to kind of look at your options that are available and have a way to organize them. Once you start engaging, you need a way to evaluate them based on how you're valued back. And then finally, when you're actually engaging with these communities, then you can contribute change. And this is a really cool setup because when you're contributing change, it actually loops back and then you influence the options of communities that exist. And it's like the circle or the loop of life. Alrighty, so after all this, maybe you're a mature person, mature career person, and you want to know, like, how do I know I'm in the right place? Oh, you'll know. So I'm not saying that everyone is like me and kind of rocks out with hands on their bed, but what I found is that when I had that psychological safety, when I knew that what I was working on was being valued and the things that I cared about for the future vision of technologies, they were also shared by my peers. This is when I just totally have flourished. So this is just in the past year. The exciting amount of work and talks, like they speak for themselves. And to kind of articulate this more into a list, I will say that that you're in the right place when you're excited about your work and you're excited about the goals and visions of your teams. You feel like you're working on it together. You have psychological safety. You can go into a meeting and you're not very kind of self-conscious and self-monitoring what you say. You can speak your mind freely. You feel supported even when you aren't even in the room. And this is a new one for me, but I started to realize that I was being supported by my colleagues when I wasn't there. And that just totally overwhelmed me with just happiness. You may get presented with other opportunities that maybe in another time in your life you would have just immediately said yes to, but now you're like, I'm really happy right now and thank you, but no thank you. And maybe this is just me because I feel emotions strongly, I suppose. You will tend to feel more joy, happiness over stress and sadness. I think most humans can relate to that. So some advice for the open source community. I hear this phrase a lot that we need to find our people. And I've definitely used it myself. But I'm starting to think that we don't really need to find our people. We need to find others, even just one person, that give us support and embrace us for our authentic selves, that value us for the work that we want to do. I think that it's most important to find community based on these shared goals, vision, values, and not necessarily a role. We're very obsessed in our society with putting ourselves in buckets. What bucket should I go in? I don't really think we need to be in buckets. I also think you should take care of yourself first. Don't be too busy. That's very hard. So like say no more, a little more than you do. Don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. Proof in the pudding approach, show them and don't look for validation of your ideas first, because often you may not get it. Also, everything is about leaning. Lean toward the people and experiences that value back. When someone doesn't value or they don't treat you the way you want to be treated, that's when you lean away. And also think about identity or limitations of these role-based groups. And I mention this because there are a lot of role-based groups, and I'm not sure that is sort of the best structure to have, but it totally depends on what you're trying to achieve. So minimally, I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I just want to encourage you to think about it. And I truly believe in this entire ecosystem of open source and research that if you find yourself first, you will find community too. So thank you. I'm Vanessa, and that's my email for my job. On Twitter, GitHub, Mastodon, I'm VSoc. On Slack, so I'm just V. I apologize, one letter, it's terrible for searching. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you have a fantastic conference. We'll chat later.
Yeah.
That was an awesome talk. Thank you, Vanessa. Any questions or comments? So I have one. So I was, we're sort of in this process of creating new structures in the university and trying to sort of figure out what people should be hired. And it's this, so we've looked at sort of what the international community is talking about, right? And we're very convinced what we need are research software engineers. And, I think what sort of your subtext is that maybe not. maybe that's not the right model. I mean, you've been very prolific in trying out the research software engineer career, but you have found yourself in some other career paths. I don't know whether you want to comment a little bit more about this idea that is it actually more of a problem that the existing career paths in the university are not flexible enough? Or is it really that there are some just titles or career paths really missing in the university?
Yeah, so kind of the common story that you hear is that someone is in graduate school or school and they absolutely love the building part, but there's not, the path for them because you're supposed to become an academic and professor and that kind of thing. And so then what used to happen in the past is they would fall into some kind of role in a lab where they would kind of get stuck and maybe work on software, but they wouldn't have the support and the things that they would need for their own career progression, so training. So that's why the RSE movement sort of started. It was like, we need to give support to these people and kind of structure. I think the mistake that the RSE community is possibly making is trying to control too much what that actually means. So for example, the kinds of things that I traditionally worked on were container technologies, binary analysis systems, infrastructure, stuff that wasn't a math library that goes into domain science. And so many times when I engaged with sort of traditional RSE venues, I was told, no, sorry, you don't fit in our bucket. And so that's for me where I sort of felt like I didn't match that thing. So to kind of better answer your question, in terms of actually, so the state of the world right now is that we don't have like a feeder for the people that you need. There are definitely going to be students out there that are like myself that have this drive and desire to build, but they don't want to go into the traditional academic path. They are probably going to go into, maybe they'll go into RSE roles, maybe they'll go into industry roles. I would say this is a hard question because I think if I were starting a group, I don't think I would put a label on people. I think I would want to make sure that I have the funding to pay them as good as they could get paid if they went to be like a software engineer in industry. And I know that's like impossible and hard, but like that is the alternative that people would take, right? And I think that's possible, at least to some respect. And I think it would require a lot of changes of the underlying kind of political structure of like how salaries are determined. I can say at national labs, we get paid well, and it's very different from academia. So step one would be like actually tackling those kind of more political problems to figure out how to get the funding. And then once you have that, just to make sure that the people have the growth and the career path that they need. But I wouldn't put a label on it. It doesn't, the problem with labels is that it's putting people in a box, telling them what they should do. And then also for hiring, what I've seen with the RSE community is that they want people with PhDs. And that's great. It makes sense. You want someone who had all those years of experience, analyzing nifty files for brain imaging. But in the same respect, I look at so many people that didn't come from having a PhD, and they are so talented, they're so motivated. And it seems like we're missing out on a huge population of people that have that passion and energy by immediately sub-selecting to basically that. And the final kind of note of caution about the title is that something I kind of alluded to with respect to values, the research software engineer has become a very academic thing. The value of an RSE seems to still be going toward being based on publishing papers. And like the whole, even the discussion about what should we be valued on that is not publishing papers will make people very angry with you, speaking from personal experience. And so like, there needs to be another kind of entire set of thinking done to figure out how are these people going to have a role in the space to support science and be valued, but not actually pushing them still into a very academic feeling role where it's still publish or perish no matter what they do.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think that, just us being involved in open source projects and bringing in people from outside into organizations, right? We very quickly realized that there are very gifted people with tons of experience in industry who don't have a master's, right? They're just a bachelor degree, and the university almost has no way of hiring them into the positions we want them to hire into because they don't have that degree. So very familiar with that. And I think that, you know, we have even, yeah, so there's like basically this this impedance mismatch between, you know, who we can hire and yeah, and unfortunately, you know, the title, so universities are very title oriented. And I think maybe the national labs as well, right? So you have to have a title, and a title is, it basically, the degree that you have determines what titles are available to you. And the titles basically also give you a scale of pay, right? In certain titles, you just can't get beyond a certain amount of pay. So it's almost calling out for a completely different model where you have more like a services model, and you basically bring in, you know, vendors. It's more like a vendor model, in which case all these things fall away, right? And so you're just paying essentially for a service, and then you don't need the title anymore. You just have basically approved vendors, and that's it.
A couple comments on that though. So when you mentioned service, so I worked in research computing, and I actually started research software engineering services. And when you think about it a priori, it seems like a great idea, but the issue with kind of providing someone with a service is that the dynamic between the two entities becomes entirely different. It goes from like feeling like you're on a team, you're in a lab, you're working together toward common goals, to you are providing a service for someone, and all of a sudden when one thing goes wrong, like they get angry at you, and there's these, and it's the fun goes away. It's just killed totally. So that's the caution with the services. In terms of the title, I totally agree. Like, for example, at Stanford, we didn't have research software engineers, but we had like 18 roles for like software developer 1.5, software developer 2, and it wasn't even spelled like the right way. It was like DEVLPR or something. It was absolutely ridiculous. But they didn't have a lot of meeting. And to kind of to look at the national labs, at least the national lab I'm at, I want to actually kind of advocate for what they were doing. So I was really confused when I joined, because my title was computer scientist. And guess what? Everyone's title is computer scientist. And it's not that we don't have internal levels, because we do have sort of a motivation and a desire to kind of work up the levels, that coincides with salary and advancement or whatever. But at first I was like, no, the computer scientist, like, I don't feel worthy of this title. But I realized how freeing it is to just have this flat title, not have to worry about like, am I a principal, senior, blah, 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 whatever. Like, no, I'm a computer scientist. Everyone around me that I work with is a computer science. We are equals and together. So I actually really like the model of the national labs, and I'm surprised about it, because I was really confused, and I'm not sure I really liked it when I first joined.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And unfortunately in the university, we don't have that. There's like project scientists, computer scientists, both of them require a PhD. You know, it's very, it's, or at least a graduate degree. And, you know, that's sort of already, so yeah, so we have to be very inventive in how we actually do this. But this is so appreciated. You know, your input is incredibly valuable for us to really think about how to sort of get this right, or better, at least in what has been tried in the past. I think there's also overlap with the discussion tomorrow with the BOF, where we talk about sort of open source conferences, right? That along the lines that Spot have raised earlier today. And I would be thrilled if you could have spent some time there as well and influence the discussions there. Yeah, thank you so much. And any other questions?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, right here.
Hi, Sam. Thank you for the talk. It was really fantastic. I had a question for you around, I really love this concept of kind of the diversity of opportunities of things to do in open source period, right? Kind of across the entire stack. And one question I had for you was about kind of using a SDLC manager, or like a specific work item management. If you've seen that in the past in open source communities, like say like publicly hosted Kanban or Agile protocol or something like that. Because I've seen some prioritization boards in some projects, but I'm always curious about like, how much would certain open source projects benefit from having, say, a producer, or depending on your industry, project manager, product developer, so on and so forth, kind of filling that role of connecting the dots, running infrastructure, stuff like that.
So I can only speak from my experience, but I just really like GitHub issues. All the times that I've used like something that what is the one that Airflow used to use? The online one that's done by, it's like with Confluence and all these other ones. It's kind of annoying and I'd rather not have done it. So I just like simplicity, GitHub issues. That seems to be what most of the open source community is doing. And then with respect to, well, the other half of your question, what was that about?
Kind of like SDLC and prioritization, like for the maintainers, how are they doing stuff like, what's the most important feature? Is it just purely amongst the developers themselves? Is there, you know, that kind of question?
I guess that totally depends on the size of the project, because when you have kind of a smaller project, you can have, you know, meetings, bi-weekly meetings or something where you chat. It's very easy to kind of set milestones or working things together. If you look at, you know, actually Airflow as an example, when you get these, or Kubernetes, when you get to these projects that are super huge, you see that they start to develop substructures of community. So SIGs or special interest groups to kind of organize that. And then they do need connections between them. So you'll see someone come, for example, into one of the channels of the Kubernetes Slack and be like, okay, who are the project leads that have updates here? And then they kind of put it all together. Those are really big projects, and they're definitely a little bit more rare. In my experiences with specifically project managers, maybe it's just that I haven't had any great project managers, but I just found that they got in the way. But that's just my experience. So I don't have a good answer to your question. I really think it depends on your institution and what your personal preferences are. I'm sure there are people out there that like love agile and that kind of thing. That is absolutely not for me.
Totally, thank you.
All right, can I? Ooh, okay.
One more.
One more.
One more.
No, I mean, it's fine. I was just really quickly going to say, Carlos, I guess for the like titles and hiring into academia, I think national labs are all different. Like the division of Lawrence Livermore that Vanessa and I work in is very much, I mean, or externally, as Vanessa talked about, are all computer science.
Yeah.
But even internally, we've hired people out like straight out of undergrad, and there theoretically is no ceiling for them. Like they get to the same place that PhDs do. If you come in with a PhD, you sometimes can get there faster because we consider a PhD work experience. So it's like equivalent time either spent at the lab straight out of getting your bachelor's or getting a PhD. But I think that, you know, not all divisions are like that, but a lot of them are kind of shifting that way. And that does help as, you know, when you're an undergrad looking at being a research software developer, a lot of those folks say, okay, well, I can either go do a PhD, I could go do a master's, or I could jump over to Google and make this huge salary straight out of the box. And I guess coming from that ecosystem, it's handy to, like, we should probably advertise to students, hey, look, there's this other track. You don't have to go to Google. You don't have to go to one of these big companies. You can work on research software, and that's a totally valid thing. And hopefully you don't need a PhD to do it, because a lot of the times, you know, if you're not working on writing papers, but you are implementing a lot of the software, you can learn equivalent stuff without having to do it.
No, thank you for that comment. And I think that we started that work with Cross, right? Because that was literally, we wrote that down in the motivation for Cross, that this actually creates a new path for PhD students in our case, but also other students, to really have a career in open source and not, you know, not necessarily in academia or in industry, right? I mean, eventually you get paid by someone, but it's basically your value is really, you see yourself as somebody who's actually really managing that community, and you become sort of famous for that, and you achieve your goals through that, right? Which is different either from industry and also from academia. But we haven't really figured out, you know, how to incentivize that other than the 2 to 4 years of funding we give postdocs. Right? This is not enough. Right. We've figured this out really quickly. Plus, postdocs are not necessarily the people, you know, who have that research product are not the same people as the people who actually are having a lot of fun building their community around it and also maintaining it. Right. So there's like a ton of, yeah, there's a big space that seems to be unexplored, and especially in the university context.
Yeah, no, this is very hard in academia. In national labs, you have like consistent funding for a lot of projects where that just doesn't exist for an assessment. It's like 5 years for a PhD, and you can't fund a position longer than that in a lot of cases on projects. But maybe this is where your program office comes into place. If you can partner with industry and then fund physicians out of that, you could get.
Yeah, there's some really exciting possibilities, right? We embedded engineers, for instance, the model that we tried, and that actually works really well too. And especially when you have that in a group where basically companies pay engineers to be in that group versus other students and other postdocs, and together there's sort of a really interesting mix that happens there. So, well, thank you so much, Vanessa.
Yeah, sure thing. I will try to come online at some point tomorrow.
So Stephanie is already like.
Yeah, yeah, I know we ran
So
a little late.
wish you were here.
Yeah, lots of energy over here. Okay, bye everyone.
Bye bye. Thank you.